Welcome, everybody, to the Courageous Truth Podcast. As always, I am honored that you have chosen to spend a little bit of time with me today. It is always such a great honor to come before you wherever you're listening to me from across America, really across the world. I know we have a big following in Europe, and we just greatly appreciate it. I've always tried over the past 4 years to be consistent. It doesn't always work that way, but I always want to keep this platform open to discuss things that are happening around the world, in my state, in your state, through a biblical lens. The Bible is what we build our foundation on, and the filter we look at every situation in our lives through. It is so important to have that foundation. I have been spending a lot of time in Washington State, engaged as a citizen in the legislative process. I don't know what state you're listening or country you're listening from, but I live in Washington State, and we have a majority Democrat in our legislature, and they are passing all kinds of crazy bills. I don't know a political term or way to talk about it, but a lot of these bills are unreal, hard to believe. But what I do want to do right now is I want to take the first part of this episode is I want to talk about the actual bills, some bills. So if you are in Washington State, or you know someone that is in Washington State, this will be a very important episode to listen to. Make sure you get your pen and your paper so that you can write down some of these bills, and I can share with you how to engage in this process. I think that what is needed most in any part of the world is citizen engagement in government. Now, I know that I have listeners in Europe, and your government might be more of a totalitarian type of government. You may not have the citizen engagement opportunities that maybe we have here in America. Maybe you have more where you're at in your part of the world. But what I would say is here in America, we have a constitutional republic. In other words, the people are sovereign in our nation and in our state. So I just want to take this time to really encourage everyone that is listening to this podcast to engage in the legislative process in your state, in your home. We're going to focus today on the state of Washington. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list a bunch of numbers, and then I'm going to give you a very small snippet definition of what each of these bills is. So the first thing I want you to do is, number one, how do we engage and how do we register a type of public comment? The first thing we do is we do this online. Leg.Wa.Gov. Leg.Wa.Gov. This will get us to the Washington State Legislative website. Once you are there, you will see at the bottom where it gives a little search engine where you can type in your bill number. All you need to do is type in the number. You don't have to have the abbreviations before it, just the 4-digit number. Make sure the year is right on the top, 2526. Make sure that is correct, and press search. And it will take you right there, and then you can follow the prompts, register for public comment. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a couple of these bills right here and offer a little bit of definition or a little bit of explanation on each one. What I would always say to do, read the bill and the bill summary on your own. Don't just take anybody else's word for it. Go ahead and do that on your own. So the first one we're going to talk about is Senate Joint Resolution 8204. This has to do with reproductive freedom and gender-affirming care. What it says is the state shall not deny or interfere with an individual's reproductive freedoms, decisions, which includes the individual's fundamental right to choose to have an abortion, the individual's fundamental right to choose contraception, the individual's fundamental right to choose to use assisted reproductive technology, and the individual's fundamental right to choose to be free from discrimination based upon pregnancy outcome, nor shall the state deny or interfere with an individual's gender-affirming care decision. What this works to do is make it so the state has no say in an abortion or gender-affirming care or any type of thing like that. I mean, you read it right there. We want to make sure that any type of state-run healthcare facility has the option to opt out of abortions, gender-affirming care, those type of things that put a mother or a child at risk. We don't want the state making the decisions for any and all healthcare facilities. Next, we're going to go to House Bill 1531. What this does is it grants the power to state and local officials to impose health measures such as immunizations and vaccines without consideration for individual choice, informed consent, or personal medical circumstances. Basically, what this is doing is it is allowing the state, if you work for the state or a local government, you have to have a vaccine or any immunization that they decide you need to have. This is a violation of our conscience, which is a violation of the Washington State Constitution. The next one is House Bill 1163, and this one states that you must have a permit to buy a firearm in Washington State, and the proof of required firearms training must be present in order to get that permit, and it will be monitored through firearms deals. The issue with this is it infringes on our Second Amendment rights, and it gives the state the option and the choice on who they can issue a permit to. If they don't like you, they don't like the way you vote, they consider you a domestic terrorist because you spoke out at a school board meeting, then they can deny you a permit. This gives state too much control over who can own a firearm and buy one legally in Washington State. State Bill 5626 establishes wage replacement programs for workers who are ineligible for unemployment insurance. In other words, taxpayer dollars are going to go to a separate type of wage protection program, much like unemployment insurance is, but this isn't for Washington State residents or American residents. This is for illegal immigrants that may not have the proper documentation because they're not here legally. My tax dollars, your tax dollars, going to illegal immigrants who do not have a right to be here, we don't want that. That's got to go. House Bill 1296, this makes changes to Parents' Bill of Rights. This has been the biggest piece of legislation in this session. I would encourage you to read it all. The main issue with this is it creates a 48-hour window before any school issue is required to be reported to parents. It could be any issue you can think of. There was a little girl who was hit by a car and killed at a Seattle school district, and the parents found out through the news. The schools did not notify the parents. Absolutely tragic story. You can look it up online. Absolutely tragic story. House Bill 1399 amends the duties of the sheriff and deputies, and it changes the language of the law from elected to appointed. We want to make sure that we as different counties can elect our sheriffs. We don't want the state police. We want freedom in our county and our sheriffs to be able to protect their counties the way they need to. State Bill 5123 adds protected classes to non-discrimination provisions that apply to Washington State public schools. Ethnicity, homelessness, immigration, or citizenship status separates sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender identity into 3 protected classes. Provides definition for these protected classes that apply to public schools. This ties the hands of so many different things. Students, it ties their hands on how they can speak to certain individuals. Teachers, how they can speak and act around certain individuals. But without even knowing who they are or what they're about, they're already in protected classes. It just creates all kinds of problems in the school system when we have identity politics that define students and kids. And really what it does is it gives all those protected classes extra privilege over other kids who aren't in a bunch of different labeled classes. This is no good. It's got to go. State Bill 5312 reduces the length of sex offender registration and supervision to 5 years if convicted on NannyNet. What this does is if you are caught soliciting minors or children online, you will only have to, because it's online and you're seeking to make contact online, you will only be a sex offender registered for 5 years. And then your supervision or your parole or probation will be less than that, even if you made contact with them. But because it started at NannyNet, they're lightening the sentencing and lightening the punishment and restrictions going forward on a sex offender. This is no good. I'm not sure why Washington State loves to protect sex offenders, but they do. House Bill 1710. Any changes of any county to elections must accommodate protected classes. This goes back to State Bill 5123. What it says is that we must allow that. Basically, what's happening is the newly labeled protective classes now have a say on what type of elections we can have in our county. So if it doesn't meet the requirements by this protected class, we can't make any changes or audits to our election process. This is DEI at its absolute worst. House Bill 1132 prohibits firearm dealers from delivering more than one firearm to a purchaser or transferee within a 30-day period. Prohibits firearm dealers from delivering more than 100 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition or more than 1,000 rounds of any caliber of ammunition to a purchaser or transferee within a 30-day period. In other words, they're going to limit how much ammo and how many firearms you can buy in a certain amount of time. They say it, not you. This is another infringement on our Second Amendment rights. Now, I know this is a lot of numbers. It's a lot of information. It can be very meticulous and very tedious, but it is extremely important that we know what's happening in our state. State Bill 5038. This has to do with hate crimes. A person is guilty of a hate crime offense if the person maliciously and intentionally commits one of the following acts in whole or in part because of their perception of another person's race, color, religion, ancestry, origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender expression or identity, or mental, physical, or sensory ability. In other words, if a crime is committed against another person, an assault, a theft, a battery, whatever that is, if the jury finds or decides that maybe you committed that crime because of that person's sexual orientation or their race, then they slap a hate crime on that. Or if you behave or act a certain way and then that person calls the hate crime hotline on you, you get convicted of a crime because they perceive that you behaved towards that person in a way that reflected your disdain for that person's identity politics. You can be convicted of a hate crime. This is a terrible bill. We've got to get on top of that. Now, I know that was a lot of numbers. That was a lot of bills. And like I said before, it is very meticulous. But it is so important that we as the citizens understand what is happening, what's going on in our state. And here's the rub. Whatever bills are passed, they're going to build on them next legislation. This is just a Tower of Babel that lawmakers are making. Now, there's a lot of good bills that are happening. I just don't have the time to talk about them. Maybe I'll do that in another podcast. But it's important that we understand the biggest threats. And that is the biggest threats to our freedom, our Second Amendment rights, our rights as parents, our rights of free speech, our rights of free movement, our rights to our own body. That is what is taking place. So like I said before, go to leg.wa.gov, follow the prompts, register pro or con position. Here's why that's important. It's important to register your position because that goes on public record, how many citizens were for or against it, and then it's read in legislative sessions. So we need to make sure that we have the most con or pro, depending on whatever the bill is. So your voice matters. Your voice is extremely important. This is one of the best ways right now in Washington State or in your state, do the same thing, to take a courageous stand for the truth. We have got to resolve to stand against the totalitarian, authoritarian government that's working its way all throughout our nation. If you live in a red state, it's coming after you next. So learn from us. We slept for too long and now we're waking up. Wokeism spreads. The left mind virus, as funny as it sounds, it spreads. So we have got to get in the way of this. And only a citizen movement will do that. Make sure you know what legislative district you're in, what are the names and phone numbers and emails of your representatives in your legislative district. I have all of mine in my phone. All of mine are in my phone. I can call them because they represent me in matters of state. So think about these things. Look for ways to engage. Continue to take a courageous stand for the truth. This is one of the best ways to do this. Share this podcast with anyone who lives in Washington State. And if you don't live in Washington State, let it be your motivation to engage right where you're at. God bless you. Continue to take a courageous stand for the truth. And I will see you next time.